Hello everyone, this is just a quick assignment update to go over some of the group discussions and assignments that you've done recently. So you had completed the work on the CRAP assignment, how do you evaluate web sources? I think that the information in this assignment and thinking about these different ways that you evaluate the sources that you encounter in your everyday life, particularly on the web, extraordinarily useful. So we've already talked a little bit about fake news. Yeah, I'm sure you've already experienced in your own lives how difficult sometimes it can be to know if the information that you are seeing is good information or not. So getting used to applying these kinds of criteria is a very useful technique and tool, not just for writing papers and communication classes, but for evaluating the information that you're using anytime in your life. So people did quite a good job on this. They highlighted, most people chose the Pew article as their first choice, the best article, CBS News second, and the Livestrong article third. Those are the order I would have chosen as well. People paid attention to things like the authors. Who wrote them? Are they experts? This is one of the big differences between determining whether a source is a great source or just a good source. So if you looked onto CBS News site, you would find that the author is basically just a general journalist. They certainly have experience writing articles, but they are not researchers or experts in the field of social media, certainly communication studies. But if you click on the authors of the Pew source, you would find that they are in fact actual experts in this field. And so the information that they provide is probably just going to be more in depth. They're going to have a clearer understanding of the topic itself than just a general journalist. Many people pointed out the references, the use of references. This is always a key. If they're telling you where they're getting their information, then it gives you a better basis from which to judge that information itself. And then lastly, many people noted certain details. For instance, in the Pew article, they talk to you about the methodology. They tell you how they collected their data and information. This is a key to knowing whether a source is high quality information or not. I can cite all the statistics I want within an article, but if you don't know where those statistics came from, how they were gathered, remember, a statistic is only ever as good as the methodology that was used to get that information. And if I don't share with you as a writer any of the information you need to be able to assess how I arrived at those facts, then you don't really have a clear basis to judge those. And so any article that's going to tell you how they arrived at things is going to be a better source to use, because you'll have a better basis from which to judge that information. One of the most difficult things, so when we use scholarly sources, oftentimes we don't have to employ the same kind of techniques to judge the information, because some of that's already sort of been done for us. Scholarly sources undergo an extensive peer review process, so people have already judged the information that is being presented in those sources. They are written by experts in the field, so you can feel pretty confident about who's writing these resources. So you don't have to judge them in quite the same way, but you still have to determine whether the source is relevant to your topic area. And that can be a very difficult thing to do. And so this group discussion gave you some practice in doing that. One of the things to note is that, like a lot of things in research, there's not a yes or no answer. There's not right or wrong. Instead, much of it depends on your judgment as the researcher. So whether an article seems relevant to your topic depends on how you're reading it and what you're pulling out of it. So when we talk about reading for a purpose, when you are going to be practicing this in a lot of assignments coming up in this class, it's really important that you read those articles with your topic in mind. they might be full of good information, but if it's not information that helps you think more carefully about the topic you're interested in exploring, then it's not a good source for you to use. So I just have highlighted, I gave you a scenario in this discussion that kind of presented some of your research interests, or the research interests you should be thinking about when you're looking for sources. And a couple of those just to pull out here. So there's lots of ways we can look at social media. There's lots of ways to look at social media in its relationship to politics. In this case, I'm really asking about social media as a tool from the user's perspective. Like, what is social media doing for people who use it? Is it making them more interested in politics? Is it making them have a diminished, I guess, perspective? Are they like caught in an information bubble because they only see information from their friends? You know, so that's a key thing to keep in mind, is that this research direction is really asking about how social media is influencing politics in a broad sense from a user's perspective. So if we keep that in mind when we look through the sources, that can help us identify information that might make a source relevant and information that might mean it's a little less relevant to use. So again, there's not one clear answer. It is about your judgment as a researcher. Several people in the assignment mentioned that they wouldn't use articles because they were based in other countries. That's a judgment call. You might choose, especially if you have a lot of material available to you, that might be a good reason to discount a particular article. But if you have less information useful to you, that alone isn't a reason not to use something. But what it does mean is that when you use it, you have to keep that in mind. So for instance, if we look at this first one, talking to the broadcasters on Twitter, network gatekeeping and Twitter conversations with journalists. So the stuff in yellow means this is information that might make you not want to use it. I mean, it's going to be talking to the broadcasters. So they're not really interested in the users of social media so much as they are interested in journalists, those who are like using social media to provide their product rather than as consumers of information. You know this based on them mentioning it specifically in the title. They also talk about networked gatekeeping. So as you learn more in this particular topic, you would know that this idea of gatekeepers is something that describes the journalists themselves, more so than the audiences. And again, gatekeeping seems to be the key area that they're interested in this abstract. But the information in green actually, maybe if you find this really relevant or pertinent to your thinking, it might point to reasons to use an article like this. So it talks about how citizens are engaging with social media, particularly in conversations with journalists. So something like this kind of information could actually make you want to use this article because it would talk about one way that users of social media are perhaps becoming more politically active. Down here, they mention specifically that political active citizens interact more often with journalists who share similar ideology. So this tells you also something perhaps important about how users are engaging in social media in relationship to political activism, political engagement. So what I want to sort of highlight here is that there's not one right or wrong answer, but that you need to sort of read for information. And if these are the kinds of information that I am going to be looking for in an article, then, this is what I would want to highlight. This is the kind of information I'd want to underline and annotate. And this is probably how I would be utilizing this source and paying less attention to some of these other aspects of the article. Other articles you were given were a little bit more straightforward and fit more directly with the topic overall. Many people mentioned that they would use this one. This one seems to be most clearly representative of, the scenario that you were given in the beginning. But other ones like this are a little bit more, you have to use your judgment. So many people mentioned they wouldn't use it because it was based in Egypt. That's a fair choice. It also seems to be focused on the power of platforms. So thinking about different platforms that people might use to collect information. And this might not really be your interest. You're interested in social media more generally, but you don't necessarily want to see what's the difference between using Facebook versus Twitter or something like this. Again, others are a little bit more clear-cut and straightforward, easy ones to use. And some might just be not useful. So for instance, in this one, Twitter as a news source, certainly it fits in the sense that it's social media and is talking about news. However, if we look through it, not only is it based in Britain, which may make it less useful, but it's also really about how journalists are using Twitter. And that's maybe not quite in line with a research project that's looking at this from a user's perspective. And finally, this last one, again, it's another judgment call. Parts of it might make a lot of sense. Other parts of it, things in yellow, might be reasons that you don't use an article like this. So I just want to illustrate that, there's no right or wrong answer here, but you should always be reading with your topic in mind. And just because an article has the same keywords in the title, or even seems like it fits in some ways, as you start to read into it further, if it's not really coming from the same perspective, for instance, it's talking about how journalists use social media rather than how users use it, or it's talking about politics in a different way than you're interested in politics. All of those things might come into play in a decision of whether this is the most relevant and the most useful source that you could use for your paper.